Our final speaker for the day is Jataayu. Jataayu has been writing and speaking on cultural and social themes and Hindutva since 2005, both in Tamil and English. The range of his topics include Hindu philosophy, Hindu history, scriptures, literature, and arts. He is active on social media and regularly expresses his opinions on contemporary Hindu issues and controversies, often indulging in constructive debates. He is a scholar of Tamil literature, especially Kamba Ramayanam. A collection of his Tamil essays has been published as a book, Kalam Thorum Narasingam. He is among the founders and editors of the website tamilhindu.com and the Tamil monthly magazine Valam. An electronics technology professional by vocation, he is currently a resident of Bengaluru. Jataayu will now speak on Spirit of Freedom and Holistic National Renaissance, Subramaniyam Bharati'S literary universe.
Good evening to all. When will this thirst for freedom quench? When will our love for slavery die? When will our mothers' handcuffs break? When will our tribulations cease? These are the opening lines of this famous poem, Endru Thaniyum Inda Sudandira Dagam, Endru Thaniyum Engal Adimayin Mogam, of Subramanya Bharati. So, as we see, it's a very interesting phrase. In second line, he asks, when will our love for slavery die? So, for a slave, at some point, the slave starts loving his slavery. So, freedom for Bharati, the great poet, it meant freedom for a living concept of India, Bharat, not just political freedom or a geographical area getting free from foreign power. Bharat Mata was not just a metaphor for him, but an article of faith, an experiential reality. So, 100 years have passed since Bharati's death in the year 1921. And this spirit, expressed in multifarious ways in all his literary creations, both in prose and poetry, it comes alive. That is much relevant and significance for the India of today as it was about 100 years back. And that's why we are talking about him here. Subramanya Bharati was born in the year 1882. During this short span of 39 mortal years, such a short life, he revolutionized Tamil poetry. He infused a sense of patriotism, vigor, and great spirit among the Tamil psyche. That this whole modern Tamil literature was actually hailed as Bharati Yugam or Bharati era. Every other Tamil writer and thinker and poet who thrived in modern literature, they hailed Bharati as their pioneer and the great guru. Just like we hold Vyasa for all of Hindu tradition. That is the space accorded to Subramanya Bharati in modern Tamil literary universe. So, in a sense, Subramanya Bharati was lucky to have been born and belonged to those golden years of modern Indian history. You know, that period, the first 2-3 decades of 20th century, or the dawn decades of 20th century in India, the air was filled with the spirit of freedom. There was talk of Swadeshi. There was the Vande Mataram movement was spreading all over India. And there was Lal Bal Pal, who were infusing the nationalistic spirit everywhere in India. By Lal Bal Pal, I meant Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal, and Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, in our own state of Tamil Nadu. So that was the time when Bharati was born and he thrived. So, very interestingly, as a nationalist, Bharati's spirit was imbued with three things: glories of the past, pains of the present, and dreams for the future. So these glories of the past, it's very, very important for any society, any nation, and any civilization. Much before Iqbal sang Sare Jahan Se Acha, Bharati wrote Parukulle Nalla Nadu, Engal Bharata Nadu. All over the world, the greatest of the country is Bharat. And he spoke of Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, and the glorious achievement of Indians, which ancient Indians and our glorious civilizations, which are still not taught in our textbooks and curriculum. Then you can imagine how the situation would have been 120 years back. So a part of his poetry is filled with this great national pride. But he just didn't stop there. There is an equal or even a bit more measure of the pains of the present. I mean, his mind was so agonized, so exasperated at the weakness of Indians, how the entire Indian mind got colonized. And on top of it, there are social evils. So, in a poem which is named Pohindra Bharadamum, Varuhindra Bharadamum. So these are very famous poem, Oli Padaitha Kanninai Va Va Va. Many Tamils have heard it. So that is welcoming the new India. And the first part of that poem is actually a po. So it is like a Bharat dying and a Bharat coming as a resurgent one. So the first lines say, away, away, away. So you talk of 100 castes, but you don't follow the dharma of even one caste. Oh, old Bharat, away, 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 he says. Then he says, you with the shining eyes, broad shoulders, a heart that has the strength of a thunderbolt, come, come, come. So this was his idea of highlighting the pains of the present. In fact, there is a lot of poetry where he harshly criticizes the hypocrisy of Indians of those days. Talk of so high things, but live a life in meanness and pettiness. And then dreams for the future. Some of Bharati's poems are very, very, very evocative, just like people spoke about Sri Aurobindo in the afternoon session. So in one poetry, he says how the future of India would be like. Every street will have schools, women would be empowered. And in one place he says, Chandira Mandalathiyal Kandu Telivom. Next line he says, Sandhi Terupperukkum Sathiram Karpo. We will go explore the space and the moon. In the next line he says, we will master the art of sweeping our streets and keep our cities and towns clean. See, in one sweep, it's a poetic vision. So he dreamt of Chandrayaan mission and Swachh Bharat, that our Prime Minister implemented. This was the dreamer Bharati, a great nationalist. And then he presented shining example of Indian manhood, or what we call Kshatra, which was a lot lacking. It is still lacking. The heroic spirit among Hindus, very much lacking. In fact, he was a Tamil poet, but he wrote great evocative poems about Chhatrapati Shivaji and Guru Gobind Singh. And Bharati's vision extended beyond Tamil Nadu. In fact, even beyond the confines of India. He has written poems about the freedom movements from all over the world. French, Italy, Belgium, Russia. In fact, when the Russian Revolution happened, he wrote a poem, the opening lines, Magali Parashakti Russia Nattinidai Kadaikan Vaital, Ange Aha endezhundhathu bar Yugapurachi. He says, Mahakali Parashakti has set her eyes on Russia and a great revolution happening there. So wherever the spirit of freedom arose in whatever parts of the world, he saw that as a manifestation of Shakti and the human spirit. So, world outside Tamil Nadu, they largely know Bharati as a poet of freedom and patriotism. But that is actually only a very small part of his personality. Bharati was a poet, he was a journalist, reformer, thinker, philosopher, and a yogi in the true sense of the word. The Bharati canon, the complete works of Bharati, it runs into no less than 5,000 pages, published in 16 volumes. Kala Varisayil Bharati Padaipugal. All in great Tamil. And out of this, only a minuscule portion of it has actually been translated into English. Only poetry, and that too about 1/5 of Bharati's poetry has been translated. Those who want to explore can seek out a great book, a short book by Dr. Prema Nandakumar, who is much familiar to all students and scholars of Sri Aurobindo thought here, because she has written a lot on Sri Aurobindo as well. She has written a beautiful book on Subramanya Bharati, published by Sahitya Academy. So that is the prolific output from Bharati. And looking at his life, very interesting. He was born to a traditional Brahmana family in southern Tamil Nadu, in the Tirunelveli district. His father was a dreamer in a different sense. He set up a small industry, and he wanted his son to get English education so that he will become a modern man. But the son had set his sight and love for Tamil and poetry, and he was a romantic from a very young age. So there we see a conflict between the father and son. But the father's business got ruined, largely due to the treachery of British, and he died. So when the tragedy struck the family, and Bharati, they didn't know where to go, so he was sent to Banaras. So even before that, he got his fame as a young poet, Bala Kavi. In fact, his original name was just Subramanyan. And the title Bharati, which actually means Saraswati. The word Bharati, Bharata. Bha means light. Rata means one who is immersed. So Bharati means she who is immersed in light. So that is one of the divine names of Saraswati. And that was given to him as a title when he was 10 years old. So he wrote poetry which some of the greatest Tamil Pandits admired, and they bestowed this title on him. So when the tragedy struck, he was sent to Banaras, and he was a old Pandit-style Tamil poet, still writing poetry at the age of 15, 16, right? So when he went to Banaras, he was put in some of the Sanskrit patashalas there, and also English schools. And in a very short while, he picked up Sanskrit, Bengali, Hindi, Hindustani, Persian, all these languages, and a little bit of French too. And after his stint in Banaras, he came back as a completely changed man. So he changed his appearance. He threw away his shikha, and he started wearing turban. Many of you must have seen the photograph of Subramanya Bharati. Doesn't look like a Tamil person as such, right? So he started growing mustache like the Rajputs grew it. So a complete transformation of a very ordinary traditional man from a heroic modern poet. And he read a lot of romantic poems from of English poets like P.B. Shelley, American poets like Walt Whitman, and his entire poetic idiom changed. And when he came back to his ancestral village, Jataayu, the first thing he did was to, throw away the job that was offered to him in the royal court, because his spirit simply could not remain confined in such a job. So he became a teacher in a school and eventually landed up in a magazine Sudesha Mitran as a sub-editor and a translator. And with that, he revolutionized Tamil prose. In fact, Bharati was the father of modern Tamil prose. He liberated Tamil prose from the shackles of panditry and archaic forms and too much of flowery expressions. Of course, you still hear some of them in political meetings, but Bharati created this Tamil prose through his journalistic writings. He gave new strength and vigor to Tamil prose. And soon he started editing full-fledged nationalistic magazines like India and Vijaya, like that. He wrote fiery and caustic editorials marked by great humor and sarcasm. Articles, poems, and speeches, all this attracted, they drew the wrathful attention of the British government. So obviously he had to evade arrest, and on the advice of his friends, he preferred a self-exile in this very city, Puducherry, because this was not part of British India. This was under French those days. So when he came to Puducherry, just a year after, Sri Aurobindo moved in here, and the great revolutionary VVS Iyer, who was an associate of Veer Savarkar. So this trio, Sri Aurobindo, Bharati, and VVS Iyer, this trio used to have great discussions for hours on the beaches and on the terraces of the buildings. So when you read those, what kind of intellectual climate that would have pervaded those discussions. So these three great personalities influenced each other in a mutual manner. And Bharati, who had an inborn spirituality in him, he picked up a lot of Vedantic and philosophical themes out of this connection. And through all this, Bharati was a fierce advocate of women's education, widow remarriage, and he was a fierce opponent of child marriage. In a similar manner, he was a fierce critic of caste discrimination, untouchability, and caste atrocities. In fact, in one of his poems, he talks about a cat, a white cat, that gives birth to kittens of different colors. Do they all become different? He asks. So a very simple and powerful way to, so this poem, Vellai Nirattoru Poonai, Engal Veetil Valarudu Kandi, many of us have read it. It was actually aimed at children. At such a young age, he conditions the child not to think of discrimination. This is one part. That is Bharati the poet. Bharati the thinker. So in his essays, so there is this great allegorical story, a fort with 5 gateways, okay? A very strong, mighty fort. It has 5 gates. He says 3 gates are well nourished, well protected. But there is the 4th and 5th gate, the Chaturtha and Panchama, completely neglected. There is great apathy by the indwellers of those 3, those who are ruling those 3 gates towards these 2. And the enemies very easily plot, and they enter this mighty fort through those 4th and 5th gates, and they completely take over the place. It is at the danger of taking over. A very allegorical story on the state of Hindu society of those days, which is still relevant even today. And due to his such progressive views, Bharati had to face the ire of orthodox Brahmanas in a village called Kadayam, which he moved in after his Puducherry stint. Because actually he had to get out of Puducherry. He got arrested at the border. After a brief jail term, he had to go back to his wife's ancestral village, which was still quite backward, and there his whole family had to face excommunication simply because he was eating at the houses of some laborers and people of other castes. Nobody in that village could understand this great genius called Bharati, who was admired by none other than people like Sri Aurobindo. Though that was the state of affairs in India those days. So, Bharati's genius, in a way, transformed all that he touched into good literature, and which often reached the heights of sublimity. In a way, Bharati was a singer with many voices. At the basis of all this was Bharati's love for Tamil. Of course, all of us love our mother tongue. It's a very natural and inborn feeling. But Bharati's love for Tamil was very deep and very intense. In fact, interestingly, and so was his love for India and India's unity. Right? So he found absolutely no contradiction in praising Tamil Thai, the mother Tamil, and praising Bharata Mata, Mother India. So this is integral unity in meaningful diversity. That is the need of the hour. So India is a multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural country in a sense, and everybody wants to preserve their diversity and uniqueness. But then you can't let the integration and the unity of India die, become a casualty to that. So you need to balance it and bridge it in such a way that there is harmony between the two. And Bharati was an exemplar of that. And I will talk a little bit about his other literary forms now, not just nationalism, the devotional poetry. Bharati was a great bhakti poet. In fact, he was an integrated personality. There is really no fragmentation between where the patriot ends, where the bhakta starts, and where the social reformer comes in, and where the Vedantin speaks. It's all in one personality. So he was a great devotee of the Ganesha here, Manakkula Vinayagar temple. Many of you know, the people of Puducherry. He has written a great bhakti poetry, Vinayagar Nanmani Malai, addressed to this Ganesha. It just starts out as a Ganesha stotra, but gets more and more deep and sublime, filled with all ideas. In fact, at one place says that Ganapati will give us, herald the way for freedom for us. And at another place, he gives the complete Ganesha Tattva, how the Vedic deity of Brahmanaspati, he then got fused with the tribal worship of the elephant god, and finally became this great god Ganapati, who is the god of the rich, the poor, the low-born, the high-born, everyone, and he integrates the whole Hindu society in one fabric. All these ideas are beautifully woven into that bhakti poetry addressed to Ganesha. And Bharati was not a sectarian worship. In fact, he was delighted in the entire Hindu epics, Puranas, Vedic lore. He was much familiar with it, being a very rooted person. But no sectarianism. In fact, he had written hymns on all gods: Ganesha, Muruga, Skanda, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali, Krishna, all gods. But Shakti and Krishna is called Kannan in Tamil. So these were his favorite Ishta deities. In fact, this Shakti idea pervades all his works. And there is his piece of literature called Kannan Pattu, which is specifically addressed to Krishna. So Krishna as friend, mother, father, king, child, teacher, lover, lady love, and even servant. He has viewed Krishna in all these facets. As a lady, Kannan becomes Kannamma. So when he is a lover, he is Kannan. When he is lady love, he is Kannamma. So basically, by exploring Krishna in terms of all these relationships, the poet goes to a space of transcendence that is free of all duality and relativity, which is an absolute state of bliss and truth and beauty. It's a great piece of literature, Kannan Pattu. And Panchali Shapatham is a small kavya written by Bharati based on the familiar Mahabharata theme, the game of dice, and where Yudhishthira stakes the nation, and Draupadi, the disrobing of Draupadi. But the main focus of this kavya is Shapatham, the terrible oath that Draupadi takes, that she will let her hair down. She will never tie her hair, because that was considered as a very inauspicious thing for married woman, till she anoints her hair with the blood of Duryodhana and Dushasana. She will wash her hair. So this is not there in Vyasa Bharata, but this is there in some of the folk traditions. So Bharati picked it up, and this great kavya is so beautiful. It achieves epic heights on the wings of everyday rhythm of contemporary Tamil speech. In fact, a person who is barely familiar with Tamil can read and enjoy this great kavya of Bharati. And this is a shining example of a modern epic. Of course, as we all know, the main symbolism in this is dharma gets temporarily subsided by the adharma, but eventually the dharma trumps. That's a familiar theme. But here Bharati invests Draupadi, the main character, with a manifold significance at three levels. At one level, Draupadi, Panchali, represents Indian womanhood. Whatever happened to Draupadi actually happened to Indian womanhood. Dragging to the court, disrobing her, denying her rights. When a hapless woman is humiliated in broad daylight, even great people like Bhishma fall silent. That happened to Indian womanhood. So Draupadi represents that. And the O of Panchali is how the Indian woman frees herself from the shackles. That's the first level. The second level, Draupadi is a very image of Mother India, because Mother India, who ruled as a glorious queen, is now exploited and trampled by the oppressive Britishers. And these valiant husbands of Draupadi, who are expected to protect her, are all silent. That is the weaklings Indians. So that is the second level. At the third layer, Draupadi emerges as a Mahashakti, as a cosmic force. Wherever there is injustice, wherever there is adharma, Panchali will arise and she will take a pledge to destroy that. That's the great epic Panchali Shapatham. So Bharati has translated entire Bhagavad Gita in beautiful poetic prose. It's a classic in itself. So he was a great translator too, not just a poet and essayist. He has also translated some Vedic suktas and the Upanishads. And I told you about Bharati's love for Tamil. One very important point is that his decision to write all this voluminous literature, prose and poetry in Tamil was very conscious and very deliberate. In fact, he had a great command and caliber over the English language as well. That's how he served as a journalist. In fact, last year, in 2021, his collected English works were actually published by the Penguin. And some of you who are interested in literature, you can read it and see how great his English prose is. It's phenomenal. Literary critics like A.S. Venkatramani has rated Bharati's English prose as of very high quality. He translated a very few of his poems also in English. And there is a great lesson for us here. So in spite of being so proficient in English, out of the love for his mother tongue, he decided to write and express every one of his feelings in Tamil. Okay? And coming to the end of my talk, so Bharati's literary universe, which I just introduced to you, because that's what can be done in half an hour. Extraordinary range, variety, and power it has. All too brief life, coming to think of Bharati, all too brief life of just 39 years, checkered in the extreme, agonies, disappointments, chronic financial worries. That's something I didn't speak, but those who are familiar with Bharati's life, chronic financial worries, exasperations, but his head was ever unbowed. His faith in his vocation as a writer and a poet was unwavering. His commitment to the ideals, be it social reform, be it freedom, be anything, it was uncompromising. And his consecration to Mother Shakti, it was absolute and complete. So, in the 75th year of Indian independence, I want to leave this dais with another lines, a few lines from his poem. Tannir vitto valartho, sarvesa ippayirai kanniral katho. He talks about this tree of freedom. Tree is the metaphor. We fostered this tree, the tree of freedom, O Lord, not with water, but with our tears. Have we the heart now to see it wither? ஓராயிரம் வருடம் ஓய்ந்து கிடந்த பின்னர் வாராது வந்த மாமணியை தோற்போமோ? He asks. We secured this jewel called freedom after 1,000 years. Remember, he doesn't talk of 200 years. We secured this jewel after 1,000 years of exhausting waiting. Shall we lose it now? So, with that thought and pondering, I end my talk. Thank you, PLF, for giving me this opportunity to present about Bharati's literature. Thank you. Yes. No, that I am not sure. But Bharati has condemned the stances of the Dravidian movement, the early Dravidian movement and the Justice Party emphatically. In fact, he has condemned this whole idea of Aryan Dravidian racism as non-scientific, unfounded and divisive. In fact, he names one of the early leaders of Justice Party, Mr. Nair, in one of his magazine essays, and warns that this whole political movement is going to be destructive.
I'm sorry, we have to close the session for today.
But the other thing, I don't know. I don't know what Dravidian movement wrote about Bharati.
But you're welcome to approach.